Hello. Well, I suppose if you're on this train, then, well, we might as well acquaint ourselves. My name's Mary Walton, but you can just call me Mary. Beautiful day out, isn't it? I mean, truly, I have been very much enjoying taking these elevated trains everywhere I go. You see, I live over on 12th Street, and they just installed one of these elevated trains right by my home. It's been marvelous. I mean, I really don't have to go out into that dirty, yucky street anymore. It's been so crowded, all of those horse-drawn carriages and whatnot. Now, all I have to do is just, well, walk outside, go up a few flights of stairs, and I am on my way, soaring across the city. It's been wonderful. And I really think that these trains, they're a sign of the times. I am very happy to be living in the modern era of 1880. I think it's fantastic. I mean, living next to these elevated trains, it does have its downsides. You see, living right next to a train, you tend to, well, hear it every night. You see, every night when I'm going to sleep, there tends to be this noise of the train coming. It starts with a low rumble at first, and then, well, it gets a bit louder, and then there's all of this banging and this clanging, and even sometimes a screeching. It's rather bothersome. I mean, all of the doctors, they say that noise is not good for you, you know? It's very problematic and bothersome. It hurts your ears. It's not good for your sleep. And those poor horses down on the street, too, well, they've been so restless and stressed out with all of this noise. Somebody's got to do something about it. And, well, I have heard of a man who's trying to fix the problem. I was just reading about him. His name is Mr. Thomas Edison, you see. Have any of you ever heard of a Mr. Thomas Edison? Oh, yes. Well, he's this rather famous inventor. He's been working on those, what are they called? Where is it? Yes, there it is. These electric light bulbs. I do think that they are a darling invention. I am very excited to get some installed in my home this very week. And, well, you see, this Mr. Edison fellow, brilliant as he is with his electric light bulbs and whatnot, the city has asked him to try and find a solution to this noisy train problem. So he's been working on it for a few weeks now, doing rather strange experiments indeed. He's been doing things like, well, he's been sticking his head out of train car windows, trying to hear the noise, and putting blocks of wood in his mouth, trying to feel the sound vibrations. Silly stuff indeed. Now, this Mr. Edison, well, I've started to hear that he thinks the problem might be too hard to solve, that it's not worth his time, and that he's going to give up on solving the whole thing. Now, if he does that, the rest of us New Yorkers are going to be stuck with this awful, awful noise. And, you know, I was thinking to myself, I won't have that. I'm a smart woman. And, well, my parents always raised me to believe that I could do anything that some silly man can do. So, well, I've decided that if that Mr. Edison fellow isn't going to fix the trains, then somebody else has to, and that somebody else might as well be me. So, well, I'll let you guys in on a bit of a secret. For the past few days, I've been coming up to these trains myself, and I have been doing experiments. It sounds a bit silly. I've been trying to make observations, figure out what's going on, what's causing all of this banging and clanging and screeching that I hear outside of my window late at night. At first, I thought it had to be something up in the engine, you know, because engines make a lot of noise, but the more that I made my observations, the more that I studied the train, I started to realize that it wasn't coming from the engine or anything up here, no. It was coming from beneath our feet, down on the tracks. Now, I haven't really told anyone about my observations or experiments yet, but you seem like a trustworthy group, so if you swear to stay honest and faithful, I will tell you all about my experiments. So, I have been making diagrams of everything I've been noticing. And as I started to think the noise was coming from beneath our feet, I started to make drawings of what that looked like. Now, this is a drawing that I made a few weeks ago. And it details the wheel of the train, which of course rides on top of the tracks. But remember, this is an elevated train. These tracks are not situated down in the ground. They are held up in the air by this wooden support box. Now, the more that I looked at this design, the more I started to realize something a bit, well, strange about it. They left all of this empty space here, in between the rail and this wooden box. And I've started to believe that that empty space is what's causing all of this horrid noise. Now, I know you're looking at me saying, Mary, that's ridiculous. Empty space doesn't cause noise. And I thought the same thing as well. But let me show you something. I have this bell in my bag, just an ordinary bell. It's not too loud. But let's see what happens when I take my bell and I put it inside of a glass jar. This container with hard walls and a lot of empty space. What did you notice that changed about it? Did I change anything about the bell itself? No. The only thing that changed is the space that the bell was in. And as it was inside of this jar, it bounced around a lot more, sure, and it made a bit more clanging noise. But all of those sound vibrations from the bell itself, they were able to bounce around in that space so much more, to echo and be made louder, be amplified. Now, I think that that is exactly what's happening down on those tracks. Down here, where there's all of this empty space, I believe that any noise that's being made by the wheels on the track is banging and clanging around and echoing just like the bell in the jar. Now, I've started to think to myself, well, if all of this noise is being caused by this empty space, then perhaps there's a way to muffle it up, to put something in there so that it can be squished and absorbed and kind of made quieter. Now, I started to think, every night, as I go to sleep and that train rides outside of my window, well, I've been putting a pillow over my ears to get to sleep. I mean, have you ever done that? Truly, if someone's snoring or talking nearby, well, I've had to do that every night since that train's been outside. And I started to think, perhaps there's a way that I could use something like, well, the feathers from my pillow or something similar to get inside of there and to muffle up that noise. And so I have been busy collecting all sorts of materials from around my neighborhood. Things like, oh, where is it? Oh, here we are. Some leather from old boots, some cotton from some of my projects, some yarn from my knitting, some tissue paper from wrapping presents. And well, I've been trying to do experiments with them, trying to see what is the quietest material, something that will work down there on the tracks. Now, I've actually found one material that works quite well. I am very excited to show you it. But first, I have to ask, have any of you ever been to Coney Island? Or to the beach in general? Well, I have some sand from one of my last travels, and I want us to see what happens when we take the bell from before and we put it into our jar of sand. Now, before I do this, I want you all to think and predict. What do you think will happen when I put the bell into the jar of sand? What did you notice happen? Was the bell louder or quieter this time? Why do you think that that happened? So as many of you may have suggested, there's a few reasons why this happened. One of which is that the sand gets inside of the bell. Another is the sand gets around the bell. It might limit the bell's movement, being such a kind of tough material. And, well, something that the sand is also doing is it's not allowing for any sort of air pockets for all of those sound vibrations to bounce around as they were before in that big empty jar. All of these things are working together to make sure that that bell does not make nearly as much clanging and banging and a terrible ringing noise as it was in that jar. Now, I've been very excited since I found one material that works very well, but I've started to have concerns. Thoughts that perhaps I should find another material that works just as well. And so I have been doing more experiments with all these different materials. Well, you see, I've actually come down to just a few, 8 to be exact. But I want to find out what the quietest material of them all is. So I'm going to do a bit of a scientific tournament to try and figure out what the quietest material I have in my bag is. Now, the materials that I am down to are yarn from my knitting, leather from some old boots, tissue paper from wrapping presents, sponge from my kitchen, some lace from old shirts, some tin foil from my kitchen, and some cotton from some of my quilting. Now, the way that I'm going to do this is I am going to shake my jars. Oh, apologies, I almost forgot. There's one more. Now, you all know that there's a lot of horse cars and horse carriages in the streets at this time. So I, of course, have a jar of horsehair just to complete the set of 8. Now, what I've been doing is I have been shaking each one of my jars, 2 at a time, to see which one is the quieter one. Now, each time that I find a quieter material, I put the loud one away because I don't need that one anymore. And I keep trying out the quiet ones against quiet ones until I finally have one material that is the quietest of them all. So we are going to see, out of my 8 remaining materials, if any of them can be just as quiet as the sand I found earlier. So up first, might as well begin here, I have leather and horsehair. Here's leather. And here is horsehair. Which one do you think is quieter? It sounded to me that the leather was the tiniest bit quieter than the horsehair. So I am going to keep leather out and I'm going to put horsehair away in my bag. Next up, I have yarn and tin foil. So here's yarn. And here is tin foil. Which one do you think is quieter? I definitely think that the yarn was a bit quieter, so I'm going to keep yarn and put tin foil back in my bag. Next up I have lace and sponge. So here's lace. And here is sponge. Which one do you think is quieter? I happen to think that the sponge was a bit quieter, so we're going to keep sponge and put away lace. And then for our last set, we have cotton and tissue paper. So here is cotton. And here is tissue paper. Which one do you think is quieter? I think the cotton is a bit quieter, so I'm going to put away tissue paper and keep cotton. Now, I started out with many materials, and I am down to my final 4. And my final 4 are sponge, leather, yarn, and cotton. And, well, I'd like you all to make a prediction, if you will, a hypothesis, perhaps discuss with your classmates and your teacher, about which material you think is going to be the quietest of these 4. Sponge, leather, yarn, or cotton. And when you make that prediction, I'd like for you to come up with a reason for why you think it's going to be the quietest material. All right, well, let's not dilly-dally any longer. Let's find out what this quietest material really is. So we are going to have sponge versus leather. Here's sponge. And here is leather. Which one did you think was quieter? Sponge or leather? I think sponge was a little bit quieter. So I'm going to keep sponge and put away leather. Next up of my final four is yarn and cotton. So here's yarn. And here is cotton. Which one do you think is quieter? I think cotton was a bit quieter, so I'm going to keep cotton and take away yarn. Now we're down to our final two materials. So I'd like us to make one last prediction all together. Which one do you think will be quietest? Cotton or sponge? All right, let's try it out. Here is cotton. And here is sponge. All right, so which one do you think is quieter? All right, I think that settles it. Cotton is our winner. Out of all the materials that we started with, cotton is the quietest of them all. And you know, I'm just going to double check to make sure that there is a bell in here after all, because it was so quiet before. And there it is, ringing true and clear. Now, first, I would like all of you to give yourselves a round of applause in your class, because you guys have helped me figure out what is the quietest material of them all. And truly, I have been doing this experiment for days now, and it has just been wonderful to share this experiment with someone. Now, I've been thinking, especially since we just found this new material that works quite well, if there might be some way to use both the sand from before and the cotton from now somehow down on the tracks. I'm going to pull back out my picture so that we can look at that. I know that I've got to use them in some way within this design to make it quiet, but I'm not really sure how. Perhaps, do you all have any suggestions on how we might use sand or cotton down here in the wheels, in this design, or on the tracks? Some way to muffle up that noise and fill in this space. I'll give you some time to think of some solutions. Well, I suppose we could, maybe, I'd have to try it out, but perhaps it would be possible to put sand down first as a kind of ground layer, and then to put that fluffy cotton on top of it, and to see if perhaps that would work. Well, I suppose there's only one way to find out, so I have made some models of the track and the box that it is housed in, and we are going to see if this sand and cotton thing really works. Now, I have prepared two models here, one of which is our rail within our wooden box alone, as it is currently. And then we have our proposed solution. This, well, sand and cotton kind of solution in which the sand is at the bottom layer and then we have cotton on top. And, well, I suppose I'll have to find some way to keep it down there, but let's see if it's a bit quieter this time. I'm going to ring each one of these, and I want you all to decide. Now, imagine that there's a wheel clinging on top of that rail. Which one of them do you think is going to make the louder banging and clanging noise that we've been hearing on those elevated rails? I happen to think that this might be a possible solution. And I think that we are well on our way to finding some way to quiet down these trains. Now, I want to thank you all so much for your help today, because truly, I'm not a bona fide scientist by any sense of the word. I don't have a spectacular laboratory. I wasn't allowed to go to university. I'm just an everyday citizen who decided that they had enough of a problem that was going on outside of their home and wanted to make a change. Now, with you all helping me out today, I hope you all know that you're able to make change in your community too. And just like I was able to do today, you can all do tomorrow. Now, I'm probably gonna have to get going soon because my stop's coming up, but I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day and that you continue finding solutions wherever you're coming from. Thank you so much for your help. I know that the next time we meet each other, these trains will be a bit quieter.